Hello everyone, welcome to Turning the Table, and today we are going to be reviewing Star Realms by Darwin Castle. This is a competitive deck building game for 2 players, although additional core sets can increase that player count. We're going to look at what makes Star Realms probably the most refined deck building game out there at the moment, and see if it's a good fit for you. In Star Realms, your objective is to reduce the enemy's authority to 0. Players start at 50 authority, and this is tracked by a pair of cards. Each player starts with a deck of 10 cards, made up of 2 Vipers and 8 Scouts. In the center of the table, there's a pile of 10 Explorer cards, and then a deck containing all of the other cards. At all times, the top 5 cards of this deck are laid out and revealed on the table, and this is called the Trade Row. The player who goes first draws 3 cards, and the other player draws 5 cards. Each turn has 3 very basic phases. In the main phase, players play cards into their play space in front of them. There is no limit to the number of cards that can be played, and cards have no cost when you play them, so generally you want to play everything that you have in your hand. Cards, for the most part, simply generate you resources. There are 3 resources as well. Trade lets you buy cards from the Trade Row or the pile of Explorers. You must commit enough trade from what you play in a turn to cover the trade cost shown on any card that you wish to buy. A purchase card is sent to your discard pile and then replaced in the Trade Row from the top of the central deck. Combat is a resource that lets you damage your opponent. You can commit combat to an opponent and they will lose that much authority. Authority is the third and final resource, and when you play a card with an authority symbol on it, you simply gain that much authority, essentially just increasing your health. Some cards will ask you to scrap something or will have this symbol, meaning that they can be scrapped in order to trigger a certain ability. When a card is scrapped, it is removed from the game and sent to a scrap pile. This is the only way to take cards out of your deck, and it's very different to discarding. Some abilities also have one of the 4 faction symbols on that ability, and that means that you can only get to activate that ability and trigger its effect if you have another card of that faction in your play zone that turn. This encourages you to somewhat specialize into a particular faction when you're buying cards from the Trade Row. There are a smattering of other card abilities that can make you draw cards, discard opponents' cards, or other random effects, but nothing is too complicated or wordy. The next phase of the turn is the discard phase. This is when all cards in your play zone and your hand are sent to the discard pile. You then get your draw phase, where you will draw 5 cards. If your deck runs out, just shuffle the discard pile, which will become your new deck. Your opponent will then have their turn, and this process is repeated until a player is eliminated by having their authority reduced to 0. One final mechanic are the star bases. These are special cards that once played, do not leave your play area in the discard phase, so they stick around between turns. Your opponent can, however, target them by committing any combat they generate to your star base rather than to you, and if they can equal the defense value of the star base, it is destroyed and it goes to your discard pile. If a star base is an outpost, then this must be destroyed before any combat can be committed to reducing your authority, so it effectively acts as a kind of defensive barrier. Star Realms also supports several additional game modes when combined with other core sets. These work at higher player counts, from free-for-alls to team battles, and they all seem to flow rather well. Now the component section here is going to be pretty short, because Star Realms is literally just cards. There are 114 cards, and 32 of them are things like your Vipers or your Scouts that you'll start off with, and all of the rest are the trade deck, which has all of the cards that you can pick up and buy throughout the course of the game. It also comes in a nice little deck box. That's it. It all fits in here. It's very compact, very accessible, and I think that's a great thing. There is also a rule sheet, which will come folded up in the box. When unfolded, it's a single double-sided page, and that will give you all the rules you need to play, and it explains them quite clearly with a couple of examples. Generally, once you know the rules, you don't have to revisit that at all. This is not a difficult game to remember how to play. The card art here is also reasonably well done. It's good, but it's not outstanding. Each of the factions are given a distinct visual identity, which is very nice, and there's always a lot of animation going on. The ships and bases in each card's image well, they're doing something, so it's engaging to look at. This is all more or less exactly what I would expect from a low-cost and highly compact card game. Star Realms seems to have become the quintessential deck building game. It is a very busy genre, but I've yet to see something as streamlined, both mechanically and physically, as Star Realms. There's really not a lot of fluff here. It's easy to pick up and play, everything fits together, but there's still enough variety in the cards that come up each game that your deck's going to be very different, so there is a high level of replayability. Because each game is limited to around 20 minutes or so, it does make it really easy to go straight in for a rematch, and most of my games do end with someone, usually the loser, wanting a rematch. And that is, again, a really good sign. Now, there's not a huge amount of strategic depth in Star Realms, and this is because you are somewhat limited in what your deck's going to be made up of based on the trade row. However, it does teach core mechanics of deck building games extremely well. I'm talking about things like deck thinning, starting off looking for a resource base and then pivot into a win condition, the importance of card advantage and cards that replace themselves in your hand. All of these things are critical not just to Star Realms, but card games in general, and many of these mechanics also find their way into heavier board games. So Star Realms is a really great teacher. There's no fluff, no frills, it's core mechanics done well, and in a way that's really easy to pick up and learn. And I think this is a good reason to like Star Realms, because it teaches mechanics that are difficult to learn in heavier games. So everything from Tainted Grail to Magic the Gathering uses these mechanics, but none of them present them in such an accessible way as Star Realms does. It's also really well paced. Games are snappy, they're quick, the setup's fast, the pack-up's fast, and it's very easy to reset and jump into another game. I find that because there's very little downtime between phases and turns, you'll shuffle in your deck after your turn, draw in your cards, and then your opponent's probably done by then and you're ready to go. It means that there's no distractions, nothing that breaks that concentration from the game for the duration of 20 minutes that match might go for. So the flip side of having an accessible game like Star Realms is that it can be a little bit lacking in strategic depth. And the reason for that is there's only kind of two areas where you get to make important choices. The first is what you buy from the trade row, and you've only got 5 options there, and some of those will be too expensive for you, some of them will be obviously bad choices, so your actual ability to choose and make meaningful decisions there becomes quite limited. And then also, if you have a card with a scrap ability, you'll have to determine whether or not you want to scrap that card or keep it in your deck and not use that ability this turn. This is really where the decision making comes in, and because there's not a huge amount, often you feel like you're just playing the game on a little bit of autopilot. You draw your cards and then you play them because you need to activate as many abilities and stuff as you can to win, but there's not a whole lot of choosing or setting up combos. This lack of player agency really becomes apparent when a single very strong or expensive card shows up in the trade row and you don't have enough to buy it, and then your opponent has their turn and just by luck they get enough cards with a high enough trade in their hand that they can then buy that card, and they proceed to use it as a beat stick to whack you over the head for the rest of the game. Now, you could say, well, earlier they set up their deck to have more high trade cards in it so they can afford that. And that might be true, but in just as many cases, it's just blind luck. And that doesn't feel particularly rewarding, especially when you keep making the right decisions, but don't necessarily get rewarded for it. Now, I don't want this to sound too negative, because sometimes the ability to play a game on autopilot while having a laugh with some friends is actually really valuable, and you don't always have to be looking very strategically at a game thinking, what do I have to do now to maximize my decision making? It's a bit more relaxing than that, and that is nice. There is one more issue I have with Star Realms, and it's something that is common to a lot of deck builders. The starting cards, like the Scouts and the Vipers that are in your deck, will be shuffled a lot. Very, very frequently. And that's going to end up in damaged edges, they're going to fray, and they're actually going to be identifiable on top of your deck because you can see the little white bits around the edge of the card. Now, this can be solved by sleeving your cards, that's what I've done, but then they won't fit in the box and you have to come up with another storage solution. But then if you've got the expansions or a second set, you're going to do that anyway. It's just something to consider that these things are high use and they are going to get a little bit worn pretty quickly. Star Realms is cheap, it's compact, it's no frills, and just like Azul from last week's review, I do think it has a good place in any collection. It is particularly good if you're trying to teach mechanics to new players that they might then later rely on in heavier card games, and for that reason alone, I think it's a valuable one to have in my cupboard. However, if you're someone that is looking for a game with a lot more strategic depth, difficult choices, and interaction as you play in order to one-up your opponent, this is not that game. It's a little bit more casual than that. It doesn't come close to a Magic the Gathering type experience in a deck builder at all. Throughout this video, hopefully you've seen enough of the cards and the art on them to make up your mind if you like the theme or not, and that is personal preference, so if you like it, you like it. I think it's quite nice but not outstanding. The other consideration is the player count, and I know that the 2-player cap on the core set will put some people off. However, you're essentially paying half the price for this as you would for a core set of Dominion or other similar deck building games which support 4 people, so it's not out of the realm of realism to just grab 2 of them and play with 4 people. It's basically comparable. And that is more or less all I have to say about Star Realms. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing and stay tuned for more, and I'll catch you next time. This is Merrick from Turning the Table.